Welcome to the panel session. I hope you all had a really good break. Just reminding ourselves why we're actually here and the purpose of this morning. And it's actually looking at how do we move from reactive to proactive. When we were thinking about the panel, we really looked at all of the questions that you shared and your challenges as you were, I guess, signing up to today's breakfast. So we've actually used those to help think about what we're going to ask them. I've got a couple of preset questions. And then, as Natasha said, please do keep asking your own questions and we will move across to those first of all. We talked about it a little bit this morning, I guess, in the earlier sessions, that the premise really is about workforce planning, isn't it? And then what everything builds on from there in terms of really becoming proactive. Before we get into the questions, I'm going to ask each of you to do a very quick intro and maybe share just the headlines really in terms of some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment. And you haven't sat in the order of the slide. Bit of OCD going on for me there. But we will start with you, Hugh.
Hi, I'm Hugh Fordham. I'm the CEO and founder of Hollaroo. I've had about 20 years, I mean, I'm feeling so old, more than 20 years in HR technology. Late 90s, I helped build one of the very first applicant tracking systems, so I know that area very, very well. And we were young and idealistic, and we assumed that if everybody had an ATS, they'd never have to use recruitment agencies, they'd never have to use job boards, everything would be managed by themselves. Now, funnily enough, that didn't work out. So I then, part of setting up Hollaroo was saying, well, actually, why isn't this working out? Is there a different way of looking at things? Is there a different way of using technology to solve the problem? And that was one of the drivers from Hollaroo. And I'm not going to go into the detail, but Marcel at the beginning of today was talking about talent communities and being able to talk to people and engage with the people outside the selection process. In a nutshell, that's one of the things we do.
Katie.
Thank you. My name's Katie. I'm the Resourcing Transformation Director from Omni. I've been in recruitment again. I'm not going to make myself feel too old, but it is well over 20 years now. I'm in resourcing HR, doing lots of different roles. My role right now, which I love, is working with talent acquisition HR professionals to look at their whole resourcing processes, practices, and get them to think about how we can maybe improve things, how we can do things differently. When I think about the companies that we're working with right now and the challenges, it's really quite interesting because they are very varied depending on what industry we're in. We work with lots of engineering organisations where the candidates are very, very scarce, and it's about, once we get them in the process, how do we engage with them and keep them in the process, versus some other clients we work with where the skills are just so rare, and it comes back down then to talent intelligence and actually understanding where they are based. Ultimately, though, my passion is brand, and that's where we see some of the biggest differences in terms of being able to get people in the process, that whole experience, and actually taking them through that kind of journey that we would call a journey from interest and consideration all the way through to actually starting and staying with the organisation. So, yeah, lots of challenges.
Thanks, Katie. And James.
Hi, I'm James Crichton. I'm a resourcing transformation consultant, but my spike of interest is around the assessment side. So I've got a generalist recruitment and talent background, but in particular I focus on solutions that involve assessment. And spoiler alert, every solution at some point involves the selection of someone through it. So it's the assessment piece kicks in through there. And I work with clients, so I'm working with different organisations all day, every day to look at the processes and how things fit together. So thinking about, for example, the assessment part, the self-selection part of your advert, people are opting in or not opting in at the beginning of the process. There's an assessment aspect to it. ED and equality, diversity, inclusion is obviously massive as we're looking through a selection process. And I think that in general, as Katie said, there's not one challenge that people are facing, but I think if we try and box it up, I think the challenge people are facing are a complete undervaluing of the complexity that sits within TA and a massive under-resourcing of the function. So when we sit here and we speak to these teams, they're like, my priorities this week are neurodiversity, ethnicity, time to hire, candidate experience. We've got to obviously do the technology piece. And at some point, someone's got to speak to a candidate about that job that we're doing. And that's the bit that we were talking about on our table, the absolute urgency that sits within recruitment functions overrides everything else. And that's, I think, something when we think about the strategic and the reactive piece, we have to be reactive. So how do we balance that through?
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll start with some questions. As we said, if you start to think about questions, use Slido to start putting them on there. But we'll kick off with a couple that we've got planned already. And it's going to you first, James. So thinking about workforce planning and I guess the economic climate that we're working in at the moment, it's been nuts, hasn't it, since 2020, pretty much. How has workforce planning really helped organisations to navigate these challenges, moving from reactive to proactive resourcing?
So I think workforce planning has been, over the past 3 years, has been something being tested in a way that's never been tested before. So Nando's run out of chicken, BP runs out of fuel, Coca-Cola runs out of bottles. These are organisations that have massive brands that should be able to attract people through. And I don't think when anyone was scenario planning their workforce, strategic workforce plan, they thought, well, what happens if all of our customers stop buying our stuff at the same time 1 month? Then we sell double of it the next month at the same time that no one can get to an interview. So there was no way this could be anticipated. But what I saw with organisations that were reactive, that didn't workforce plan, and particularly in retail, in logistics, they lost money. They just couldn't operate. So we saw some of our customers closing down operations because they didn't have the people. I've done this a long time. I've never seen it to that level before. However, when people realise and when people start to think about what they need to happen, they could then start to think more proactively. So what I've seen done better is engaging with the operational business. Now, I don't really like TA sitting here and going, TA, we're TA, and this is the business, and we're TA, and this is the business. So I try and avoid that language, but I'm about to use it. But it's about saying recruitment's operational. Recruitment doesn't sit in the middle. TA or whatever we want to call it, doesn't sit in the middle and then dictate what's going on. We need to understand from you what you are going to need. We need you to think about attrition. Don't come to me and tell me tomorrow that someone's leaving for maternity. That is a stupid thing to do. You've known about this for a certain period of time. So it's about the people that have done it well engaged with the hiring managers and the business and made it understood that it's quite tricky. So we need to work together as a business. And I see some great examples of that. And there's a consulting engineering firm that I work with where they were bought by PE. They had quite a laissez-faire approach to their talent strategy previously. But this PE company comes in and they can say to the business, look, you kind of know what your client cycle is going to be over the year. You know where your spikes are. We can tell you what your attrition is. And so we now have a monthly schedule where we know pretty accurately what's being recruited. And off the back of that, we can then start to think about employer brand. We can then start to think about D&I. And actually, okay, well, if we know what we're recruiting, what does that balance of that recruitment need to look like? But if you're just reacting all the time, you can't. It's much more difficult to then think about the more inclusive aspects.
Thank you. So some questions are coming up already. We're going to look at them in a second. But we're going to move to you, Katie. Yeah, you definitely don't turn around. That was fun. I feel so uncomfortable on these chairs. Building on what James just said, we know that an effective employer brand can make all the difference, moving from reactive to proactive. Yeah. Can you talk us through some examples? What stood out for you? Maybe some of the work that you and your team have done or some other organisations that you've been working with?
I think for me, and I'm always going to say this because I think, the brand is the differentiator, but if you don't have that kind of clear brand, clear employer brand, it is going to make it nigh impossible to move from a reactive into a proactive world. And especially in terms of what James is saying, having that kind of relationship, understanding ahead of time what roles you're looking for, it's that information that helps you think about how do I turn that into a brand and into getting the kind of right messages out. And when we think about employer brand, there are two words that always stand out to me, and that is authenticity and advocacy. And they're the two things that you absolutely need to make it really effective, to make sure that your brand, feels really authentic to your employees and to your kind of external audience as well. I think that people can get really overwhelmed about the idea of doing an employer brand and think that actually there's too much work. I'm going to have to get loads of videos done and loads of really professional images, and we can't do any of that, and actually that puts more people off than actually thinking about how can I approach this, what can I do. And the business case sometimes for that can be really hard for your kind of hiring communities, your key stakeholders as well, because we're still trying to look at how we track the real return on investment when it comes to brand as well. So you're almost having to go in still with this conceptual kind of idea. But what we do know is that organisations that do have a strong employer brand are absolutely going to be able to plan their recruitment better, going to be able to build some of their nurture programmes, which we'll move on and talk about. But for me as well, it's coming back to that concept of not feeling too overwhelmed, we know that there is more interaction with content that is actually employee-led, which comes back to the advocacy side of things as well. So if you are kind of come up against barriers with your organisations around trying to get really great videos done or images or things like that, think about how you can get that content internally from some of your own hiring communities, from some of the new starters that have joined the organisation, because that is the kind of content that we see more engagement from. And your video content does get 2 times kind of more interaction than if it is just kind of, word type of content. Your employer brand is also really important when you think about how you're proactively contacting people as well. So again, if we're thinking about the messages that you're sending out, I presume some of you or some of your teams will contact people on, LinkedIn, using your recruiter licenses. The kind of messages that you put out there is exactly where you should be using your employer brand. Just sending your kind of set job description and things like that isn't really going to get that interaction that you kind of really want, or the take-up that you want. And again, I suppose the most important thing as well when we think about employer brand, and weirdly enough, when we work with organisations, they forget this bit. They forget the activation bit. They forget the bit that says, okay, how do we take it to market? What do we do with this great messaging now? And even if I've got a great video, where do we host it? We know that the best place is going to be your career site. So we know that that's the perfect place to host this content. But what else do we do from there? And more often than not, that's the bit kind of where, talent acquisition absolutely needs to get involved, because it will come to you to think about how you take that to market. So other than your career site, where we've seen real, activation work really, really well is around these advocacy programs. So it's at that point where you get your employee network groups involved, you get people involved to help share messages that are going out organically. You think about how you're proactively going to target your audiences. If you have an employer brand, think about candidate personas. If you don't have an employer brand, pick a business area to develop a persona, I would say, and that can be a real great case study. But yeah, your activation is the key thing really, and it's about understanding where your target audience is. And weirdly enough, sometimes we don't even ask that question of our kind of networks. We don't say to them, where do you hang out? What do you do? What platforms are you?
Time's up, Katie. Sorry.
So in the flow, I didn't hear it.
So sorry.
I've lost my train of thought now. But yeah, so for me, it's all about activation, understanding where your audience is. So once you've got your employer brand, that's great. Understand what your key messages are. Understand your audience. Be discoverable. Don't be a secret. Again, we go to organisations and we work with them and they'll say, we're really great to work for. Everyone who's working for us, but nobody knows about it. And you think, okay, well, this is absolutely about getting these messages out. And then the third thing, which is probably the most important thing when we think about using your brand to go from being reactive to proactive, is your nurture programs. It is your talent pools. And it is thinking about, once we engage with these people, and the whole point is with employer brand is you're not using that because you've got an advert, get an advert out, get a response in. It's the testimonials, it's the key messages, it's all of this content that you're pushing out to help bring people in. And then once you've got them in that nurture program, that's again when you're going to share some really great messages. I could go on and on, but I'm thinking
That's right. I was reading an article from Personnel today. I'll share it around later. It had all loads of latest stats about dropouts, which you were talking about before. One of the things it was talking about, though, is that we have all of these great websites and brands, and this is what it's like to work here. But actually, it really is the candidate experience. And there's so many examples of then that the candidate experience is nothing like the brand. Yeah. And these, quite horrendous processes, and you've got to come for the interview at this time. But we're really caring. And when you've got that oddity, the volume of people that then drop out, it's really easy to fix, isn't it? But it was a really, really quite insightful bit of research that's just come out. So
yeah, I guess that's the authenticity piece. If you don't have that, and you're right, everything leads into the experience.
Yeah,
you have that, you're going to get more dropouts.
Okay.
And more counter offers.
Thank you. Got to ask you to pass the mic. So Katie just touched on the concept of nurture programs. For everybody in the room, we have actually recently partnered with Hollaroo for one of our clients, ISS, and we've built a talent program, which hopefully you're going to share some of those stories. It's had a phenomenal success so far. Can you tell us more about how to improve outreach results through nurture programs?
Yeah, nurture programs, talent pipelining, but just before you reminded me, the last event I was at, we were talking about some particularly challenging subject, and somebody's phone went off, and it was the Mission Impossible theme tune. It was so perfect. It could be planned.
I'll cue it up for that.
Yeah, so talent pipelining, why, I guess, the first question is why do you do it? And Giles talked about, what are the problems that we're trying to solve? And I think both James and Katie have identified some of those challenges. So with workforce planning, if you do it well, you've got an idea of what your organisation's needs are going to be, let's say, 12 months in the future. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? If you sit there and wait until the actual jobs get raised, you've effectively wasted the time that you have. So is there a way to start to understand the market, start to understand what the people are that you need and where they are, and are they interested in you as a business before time, so that when the actual need rolls in, you can actually, you have already an engaged audience to do something with. And then, Katie, the whole employer brand has become so much more complex than it used to be back in the day, and it's a very nuanced message that you're having to convey, and your audience is much more diverse and reacts to messaging in different ways. And one of the things we say is, if you have got such a complex message to get across, it's much better to get that message across in a when you've got the time and space to do it, rather than in the slightly pressurized atmosphere of when you're actually recruiting for that specific role. So it's about having the time and space to have a conversation with people, rather than we need to get you in the door next week. And Katie's mentioned it, authenticity, advocacy, giving people a voice is the most important thing, and often that's looked at from the point of view of the organisation, giving their people a voice, but I think also we're very strong on let's give the candidates a voice as well, and let's try and understand their needs and build the learning on both sides rather than just one way. So I mentioned 20 years building ATSs and how we had this idealistic goal, and sort of knowing those challenges, what hasn't worked, and the first idea was, an ATS, you could capture everybody who's ever been interested in you, and quite quickly you'll never have to talk to anybody else again. Obviously that didn't work, and the main reason it didn't work is the data that you got was instantly out of date. So there's your candidate databases became filled with rubbish data, and so it was impossible to find the good people in there. So that was sort of the first try. The second try was the idea of a CRM, and the main idea there was at least getting your data up to date. So having the ability for people to update their details, get you more recent information about what they're interested in, and being able to target them. And I think that was an improvement, definitely. But you never quite got the sense. You could tell what people were interested in, and you could tell what skills they had or what have you, but you didn't get that insight into how ready they were to go and how interested they were in moving at that point. So you'd look at your candidate database or whatever, and you'd say, we've got 1,000 people who match that particular profile, but then you get in touch with them, and you don't know the ones who actually would be interested in moving. So the next level, which is hopefully where we're at now, is building that understanding not only of what people are and what they're interested in, what their culture is, what their values are, but also keeping track of where they are on that spectrum of being totally passive but being happy where they are, ready to move, and then adapting the experience for that. Because if you're building long-term relationships with people, you can't be just shouting at them about jobs every week, because that'll turn them off very, very quickly. So that's sort of where we've got through history, and meeting those challenges of what do you do with this foresight, what do you do with conveying your employer brand. And one of the ways to think about it is, recruitment consultants are still around, and you sort of rail against it and all the very expensive whatever, but you have to think about why they're still around. And one thing they're really good at is nurturing relationships with candidates and keeping track of where people are and which are the ones to talk to. And the reason why organisations haven't been able to do that in the past is that's actually a really labour-intensive activity. It's a very resource-intensive activity, and the agencies spend a huge amount of time and money on it, and organisations haven't been able to do it. But now there are technologies, there are ways to do it out there that give that ability to build long-term relationships with candidates, to in-house recruiters, and ideally start to build those engaged pipelines that you understand, that you know who to target. So Louise has mentioned we work with Omni with ISS, and we've built basically a talent engagement platform for them where they can capture everybody who's interested in ISS outside the application process, and then keep track of what people are interested in, but also are they ready to move, or are they just browsing at the moment, adapting the experience based on what's where they are on that spectrum, and then also starting to engage with them and starting to see what's the cultural fit, what's the skills fit, where they could fit in with the organisation, and getting that understanding so that who are the good quality candidates who are ready to move, and those are the ones to target. And the key thing to convey, and hopefully this will be backed up by the Omni team, is all of that has been delivered without having to have dedicated resource to it, without having to hire people to manage the relationship, because it's all being managed by the platform. So it's delivering this lovely experience, hopefully on both sides. So hopefully the recruiters are happy as well as the candidates, but without having to put huge amounts of time and resource into it.
Thank you. Didn't go off. We've been getting some really good questions, and some are actually combined. So I thought I might go to the last. That's why I just like to stand up. So short. One of the questions is, I think it was mentioned that Ofcom, it's just gone. Oh, thank you. Is achieving 25% diverse hires from recruitment. How did we achieve this? And also there's a connected question of how can we tackle positive bias in our processes? So Katie, James, you've both, I guess the cheeky answer is you hire these two, but you'll give the insight behind what we've actually done with Ofcom.
I can talk a little bit about what Ofcom have done in terms of their brand, and then James has done loads of work with their teams around, they call it the bias disruptor, which I think is really powerful. And, Ofcom, let's be honest, are a great client to work for because they take it really seriously. And that really, one, is the biggest differentiator, is it's important to them. And it's important to them not just at, a local TA level, it's important to everybody in that organisation. So everything that you do is driven by it. Their brand went through a relaunch about 12 to 18 months ago. And it took ages to kind of get it to a position that we needed to get it into. It was very people driven. And again, they're in a position where they wanted to mix up their brand as well. They wanted to be an employer of choice. They wanted to recruit more of a diverse mix from a skill set point of view, as well as from a kind of general demographic point of view as well. And so the brand was crucial to that. And what we've been able to do with that is, one, create a great activation list, understand exactly where our talent is and what kind of messages we want to get in front of them. And that came almost what you were saying as well, Hugh, that it is really nuanced employer brand, and each audience wants something slightly different. So that kind of messaging was really important as well. And we knew where they were, the messages that we wanted to kind of get across. We started to work with some partnerships, some organisations, not just about advertising on their job boards, because it doesn't work, in my opinion. What does work is education and real partnership, and that's where the difference comes in. We know that a candidate applying for a job, they're not going to be any different whether you're male or a female, but what is the difference is, what are the stories that I can see? So we focus the career site, for example, we focus the messaging on stories and on people and what they're going to say about really working there. Talk about the assessment piece.
Certainly. There's a lot of detail I could go into, and I don't think that would be useful. So I'm going to try and keep it high level and talk some core principles. And that was the approach. So we are in the process, it will never finish. We are in a continual iterative process around redesigning, reformatting, improving the assessment process as a whole. And we're working to 12 key principles within looking at assessment. So it's got to be predictive, it's got to be fair, it's got to be inclusive. First thing is fair, inclusive, and different. So one is about reaching a wide range of people and making them feel included in the process so they don't drop out. Fair is making sure that decisions are made for the right reason.
And linking to the other question about how do we tackle positive bias in our process, what I think that's talking about is positive action.
We're not putting positive bias in the process. We're not saying if you are a certain whatever, then you will get through the process. What we are saying is that linking very much the attraction piece, is that we are open to all sorts of people, and we will look at people from non-traditional backgrounds, we will look at people, but we as an organisation are very, very inclusive. And as Katie said, the thing that they're doing differently is that they genuinely mean it. So they will wait longer to hire a person if they don't feel that the panel going through, sorry, the shortlist going through is representative of the sorts of people that it should be. We've done a massive amount of work, and if anyone is looking at this, absolutely, job descriptions are absolutely the most important thing. What do you need to be effective in the role, and what doesn't matter? And it's really hard, and we're still on this journey with lots of hiring managers who, in the genuinely the most inclusive organisation I've ever worked with regards to this, hiring managers still push back. They still want certain degrees. They still worry about gaps in CVs. They still have their, whatever the nuance of the thing that they think is predictive of success. So we take an extremely evidence-based approach, and we say you can absolutely have that degree, that qualification. You can't have that many years experience, but you can say some significant experience and kind of work around that. So to your point about 5 years. But you've got to tell me why. You've got to be able to objectively justify it. Now, and then there's a massive trade-off. So what happens now is we go, we're all lovely in behavioural, as long as you meet the benchmark, it's fine. 1,000 people apply for a job and we can't screen any of them. So we then have to think about, okay, well, genuinely is predictive of performance. We have to do a lot of work and a lot of thinking to make sure that we know what we are assessing for. So that's the first part. The second, and making sure that's inclusive, and thinking about things like, so good communication skills, good team skills. Okay, what does that mean for a neurodiverse community? Do they really need to be able to walk in a room and charm everyone? Or actually, that's probably not that important. Once we've worked that out, we then go out, how do we assess for it? In all honesty, it's my day job, and actually it's the easy part of it. Once you know what you are looking for, it's not that difficult, typically, to work out a way to assess for it. So then we have a structured process. But one of the decisions that we made was we are not going to go, right, what you do is you do first stage interview and you have to say, well, can you give me an example of a time when, and you have to say it like this, and this is the probing question, and we score it very formally. We do score it formally, but we don't, we want to empower hiring managers. So one of the challenges we had before is that hiring managers didn't always believe in an old, really, really, really rigid process where they were told consistency and fairness means doing exactly the same thing and saying the same things in the same way to everyone. That's not the best way of doing it. So think of the equity equality equation here and about having to adapt your process for different people. So we're now saying hiring managers are better trained to have a better, more fundamental understanding of biases and of inclusion, and we give them a little bit more leeway than they're used to. So we say, okay, if you feel that this question could be asked in a slightly different way, which might make that individual better able to answer it, ask it. If you've got someone that's a graduate that's got no experience, you've got someone else that's worked for a different company but in a similar role, you've got an internal candidate, if you ask the same question in the same way, they can't all tend to it in the same way. But you can rephrase it because you're looking for the underlying. Now, this will never be solved because there is that degree of subjectivity which freaks people out when I talk about it. It creeps in there. But it gets better results, and it's then iterating and iterating and iterating. I don't know how to answer the question, but I think that those some of the core parts, and we track it. We track the hell out of it. So we can see at every stage in the process, by different groups, who's dropping out, who's progressing. We know where there are some challenges, and we hold our feet to the fire. And tomorrow I'm sat with the chairs of the Race Network. On Tuesday I'm going to be sat with the chairs of the Disability Networks. Not for anything in particular, we're just taking soundings, we're just listening, we're taking it back, and we're just making sure there's open dialogue. So it's really long answer, I apologise.
I love it. I could just listen all day. I'm going to ask one more question because we have actually run over, but it's just having you three here is really valuable. So we're going to go with the one at the top. So we understand the importance of engaging with talent pools and communities, but creating lots of valuable content can be a challenge. Can you share hints and tips around content creation?
Well, content creation is leave it to the experts. There's, I'm sure Katie could say all sorts of stuff about that, but I just want to make the point that one of the challenges, if your only way of engaging with candidates is sending them emails, is that every single email you have to have fresh content, you have to curate it and make it new, and that's why sometimes it can be seen as a very resource-intensive exercise. If you turn it around and make it a candidate self-service exercise, every single new candidate that's going in there, all of the content's fresh. So basically, if you turn that conversation around and let the candidates engage with you rather than the other way around, you don't actually have to create that much content because you're not having to constantly refresh it. You can add You can add stuff in, and there's nothing wrong with that. And certainly with your passive candidates, you anyway want to be talking about things other than recruitment. So tap into your marketing departments and just talk about the business and interesting projects you're working on or what have you. And they'll have a ton of content to do that. But the key point is, it's not actually that scary, because every single new candidate, it's all going to be fresh. So you don't have to be constantly refreshing your content.
Well, to be fair, I would completely agree, and it can feel really overwhelming that you've got to have new content all the time. And this is where your advocates come in, and this is where they are so important, as well as working really closely with your marketing team, because like you said, they're constantly creating this information. And ultimately, the content you want to put out isn't, we've got a job. It is, this is what it's kind of like to work here. So everything that your marketing team is sending, that's your content. Everything that your advocates, and create an advocate program where you want people to engage, create some of their own kind of content to put out, and that's all of the information that you'll share as well. Part of the work that we do, one of our clients, huge facilities organisation, and we do have a nurture program through Hollaroo, and it works really well. It's called Talent Place. And Jodie's there, she's nodding her head. She's worked really hard on this, and it works really well because actually everybody in the team is responsible as well for creating that content and looking for content. So your content comes from news articles, from marketing teams, from theirs, from advocates, from your own team. So it's not as scary as it seems when you break it down and think, where actually could that really come from?
Thank you very much to all of you.